Does anyone remember Redfall? The game that was the Xbox's pride and joy? The game made by the critically acclaimed Arkane Studios, the same ones known for the Dishonored series and the perfect 10 out of 10 IGN rated Deathloop. It also happens to be the same game that was so bad at launch that basically set Microsoft's gaming division into a tailspin, and Xbox fans overdosing on copium despite the game not even being able to run at 60 FPS on release on the Xbox consoles. But that's since been patched in. There was, of course, no shortage of reasons why the game was so badly reviewed. The brain dead and broken AI, the lack of production value in the story, the always online requirement, and the forced looter shooter mechanics that have become more of a plague in the video game industry than a plus. The fallout from Redfall's release was pretty intense and immediate, and even had Phil Spencer come out and apologize for the state of the game, stating, "I'm disappointed, I'm upset with myself." Ouch. I can't think of any other situations where CEO has come out and publicly made a statement about a video game such as that. Arkane Austin, of course, committed to the vision and they wanted to improve on the game as it was released in such a poor state. I'm sure many fans were hoping for a No Man's Sky-like comeback story. Now, the game did end up getting a number of updates, and I'll go over those towards the end of the video. Unfortunately for Arkane Austin, despite their best effort in May of 2024, Microsoft Gaming President Matt Booty announced that the development on Redfall would stop, as well as Arkane Austin shutting down as a studio. Well, it's now been some time since those unfortunate announcements were made, and I want to go back to Redfall and see the current state of the game. Of course, the game is on Game Pass, which made me feel a lot better about making this video. Honestly, going into this video, I had no idea what to expect. I obviously did some research on the game and what it was criticized for before jumping in, but Redfall was an interesting experience for me to say the least. To begin, I couldn't even start the game. No joking, I couldn't get past the connecting screen. This was on a fresh install as I had not played the game previously, but after multiple shutdowns and relaunches, I decided to look the problem up. Lo and behold, there are multiple Reddit threads about the same issue. The solution? Press enter on your keyboard and then spam the spacebar to get past the connecting screen. And the funniest part about all that is that it actually worked. Just think about the fact that any person who intends on downloading the game and giving it a shot would be met with this connecting bug and would have to look up the solution just to play the game. What a start. Anyway, you get the option to select between different characters, all with their own special abilities and one ultimate-like ability. I didn't try them all. In fact, I've only tried one of them for my playthrough and I had no intention of going through multiple of them. Defender is who I settled on, and there's some customization, but only for the type of skins you're wearing. Since it's a first-person shooter, it never made sense to have cosmetic skins like this, especially if you're playing in offline mode, because like, who's gonna see it anyway? But I digress. Let's talk about the story setup real quick. So the game takes place in a fictional town called Redfall, which is set in the state of Massachusetts. Essentially, the premise is that a science experiment has gone terribly wrong, leading to a legion of vampires to occupy the town and proceed to isolate it from the rest of the world. As the player, it's your job to support the local community, kill vampires, free hostages, and essentially free the town of Redfall from the bloody fangs of the vampire. That's basically about it, so let's talk about the gameplay. Arkane is known for their immersive sim style gameplay, or in other words, a first-person perspective game with RPG-like elements. The Dishonored series was praised for the freedom in player choice in how to approach and complete a mission. And funny enough, there is some of that here in Redfall. So let me actually back up a bit here. Redfall is a first-person looter shooter. Each character has their own unique kit of abilities to use in combat or traversal. The actual shooting mechanics that the game has are okay at best. I mean, they just don't feel super tight, and generally the aiming just feels somewhat floaty, but I guess it gets the job done. There are, of course, a number of different guns that the player can pick up and use, but more on that in a bit. The vendor has two abilities to use, one of them being a lightning rod that shocks nearby enemies, and the other a traversal ability that allows you to translocate from one area to another with ease. I actually ended up liking his kit. The ability to translocate was really helpful in getting around, especially when approaching a mission area that I want to enter from some unseen entrance. So if the gunplay and the kit that I'm using is fine, then where does the bad begin? Well, almost immediately, unfortunately. So one of the main complaints that critics and players had when the game released was that the AI was very stupid. Now, I'm not sure how bad it was when it first released, but like, it genuinely doesn't seem like to have gotten any better. There were countless times I'd be standing right in front of an enemy who somehow didn't see me or just didn't want to shoot at me. Enemies don't bother taking cover when engaging in a shootout. Instead, they kind of just stand in the open and slowly work their way towards you. Some enemies have megaphones to call in reinforcements, and they tend to be the dumbest, as they'll immediately whip it out instead of first looking for cover. The human AI is just generally dumb, and this was something I thought would have been fixed, as to me it seems like one of the most crucial issues. But I guess not. The vampire AI can be easily tricked. Like, if you just stand behind the box, they'll aimlessly flail at you while you pump some damage into them. I don't know, the AI just wasn't good at all. Just look at this fight against the Hollow Man. This was so easily exploitable that I just stood behind a pillar and hit him with repeated headshots. There is no way this went through any kind of testing before being put out. Anyway, some of these issues have been beaten to death, and I don't want to reiterate things we already know. So let's talk about the open world of Redfall. Firstly, the atmosphere and most level design is actually pretty good. I genuinely like the vibe. The art style of it all was really nice too. All of the buildings that can be entered look great on the inside, and there's a lot of environmental storytelling here. So whoever the art team and level design teams were, they knew what they were doing. The game is actually broken up into two different maps for some reason. Once you get to a certain point of the main story, you'll have to leave the first area with no option of coming back, which I found really strange. Anyway, there were a number of safe houses scattered on the map, which can be acquired by simply restoring power to them, and doing so gives you a new fast travel point. There are also these safe house missions which I first thought would be optional, but eventually are required to progress the main story. These safe house missions typically end with you defeating a vampire underboss, but they usually pose no challenge at all. Along with that, there are these nests that pop up that require you to go through these doorways, which take you to what I think is a procedurally generated level with a number of vampires scattered around. All you really do is eliminate them, then shoot this heart thing that explodes, and then you got 1 minute to perform a smash and grab like activity before the nest collapses on you. There is also a variation of these nests called Elder Nest, which leads to a boss fight, and these were actually better than some of the main story boss fights. But these Elder Nests end the same way as the others do. Essentially, it boils down to a smash and grab after defeating the boss. That's basically all of these side activities there are to do in the open world, and to be honest, they get pretty boring quickly, especially the non-Elder Nests. I did like 3 of them, and sometimes they have some traits to create some variation between them, but they're just so short and pointless. There are a few different progression systems in Redfall. I'll start with the loot. The game has your standard assortment of rarities ranging from common all the way up to unrivaled, which is the highest tier. The higher in rarity you go, the more random properties that can potentially roll in a gun. The unrivaled tier seems to just be a bunch of unique weapons that can have a couple of additional modifiers. The loot system is pretty rudimentary. What was most interesting was the fact that the unrivaled and epic weapons came around so quickly. I would have expected that the higher rarities would drop much later in the game, but they were dropping almost right away. It's funny because this is the polar opposite of a game like Anthem, whose loot system was so bad that it eventually killed the player base. In addition to your guns, you have a Blood Remnant slot and a Vampire God Remnant slot, which basically gives you additional buffs like healing after killing an enemy or granting a faster charge for your ultimate. The loadout system is fine. It's honestly nothing special. It really just seems tacked on for the sake of being a looter shooter. The guns generally aren't really that interesting either. My favorite ended up being the stake shooter, which was fun to take out vampires with, but the other guns are your standard assortment of pistols, shotguns, snipers, and so on. There's also a skill system which is okay. Basically, you can level up your 2 existing abilities. As you climb up the skill tree, the abilities get stronger and get augmented in some way. My lightning rod can now discharge quicker and more often. What's funny is that a number of these skills and all the different skill paths take into consideration that you might have an ally. Of course, the game is now available as single player only, so a good chunk of every skill tree is basically useless. There's also this community skill tree that you can level up by freeing hostages or unlocking safe houses, among other activities that will grant you some sort of buff or extra capacity for ammo. There are a lot of choices to make here. Some are good, some are bad, and some are just okay. Performance wise, for me, was generally negative. I had to turn DLSS on to ultra performance because my 2070 was on the verge of death way more often than I had expected. I then had to turn the graphics down to medium because there were so many frame drops that I experienced. Along with that, there was a good amount of stuttering. Most of my frame drops intensified when I was running around the open world in combat with a lot happening on screen. I was pretty disappointed because I thought this game would have at least held a steady FPS on my computer, but that wasn't even remotely the case. As far as how performance can go on your rig, I would recommend looking at the specs. I thought my 2070 would be good enough, but clearly not the case. Let's talk about the updates since launch, and I'll only cover their more big updates. So, Game Update 2 brought a performance mode to Xbox Series X and S. It also added stealth takedowns and accessibility improvements. Game Update 3 added a new sniper rifle and did a balance patch for enemies and their traits, and Game Update 4, which was their biggest, actually ended up adding the Elder Nests, which were my favorite side activities. They also added an offline mode and also added a pause feature when playing in single player. Yeah, that's all the updates outside of some smaller hot fixes. Now the question is, was Redfall that bad of an experience for me as I made my way through the game? The honest answer is no. It really wasn't that bad. Was it great? Not even close. Was it good? No. Was it okay? Yes, I mean, it was very okay. There were some highlights for me, such as the level design, and just the world in general was nice. And the concept overall was pretty cool. Some guns were fun to use. I liked the different ways I can approach missions. Some abilities were also fun to use, and the combat was generally fast-paced. Unfortunately, for as many good things that I just called out, there were an equal amount of bad things, and even more. The story is bad. The way the story is told is even worse. Like, it's basically just these slideshows with the main character talking over them. There aren't really any cutscenes and just a general lack of production value. The AI is absolutely useless. Approaching missions didn't require much thought because I knew I would have no issue disposing them. The loot and skill systems are just okay. They're nothing special, and given the fact that this is a looter shooter, you'd expect some sort of robust system here. The side activities were boring. I can only clear nests so many times, and the number of bugs I encountered were more than I had anticipated given the number of patches. There was just an overall lack of polish. To add to that, the game clearly felt rushed and forced. A lot of systems seem untested, especially boss fights and enemy AI. The whole co-op looter shooter thing was totally unneeded, and these types of games continue to be a plague to the industry. It's clear players don't want this and have almost never wanted it. We've seen countless games fail, like most recently Suicide Squad, along with other games like Anthem and Babylon's Fall. I think the industry has to be at a turning point, with studios realizing that these aren't the type of games that players want. They don't want to always be online. They don't always want to grind. They don't want another looter shooter. Anyway, I'll save that discussion for a later time. So that wraps up my revisit of Redfall. I went in expecting nothing and came out with those expectations met. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.